Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. I appreciate the opportunity. And this is a very detailed presentation, so if you'll abide me, because I've got a lot of notes here, I won't get into all the minutiae, but there's a lot of information that I want to be able to impart to you. So I like to tell the story. So this quote was in 1993, President Bill Clinton said, quote, "When the word of a crisis breaks out in Washington, it's no accident that the first question that comes to everyone's lips is, where's the nearest carrier?" And that sets the stage for our presentation here. Some highlights of the early part of carrier aviation. January 28, 1911, Lieutenant Theodore Ellison became the #1 aviator in naval aviation history. In May 8th of that year was what they considered the birth of naval aviation. And that's when the original plans were designed for the first ship to be built. In July 1 of 1911, the Navy's first aircraft, the A-1 Triad, made its maiden flight. And then on the 24th of April of 1914, Lieutenant Bellinger became the first combat mission in a military aircraft. And then in September of 1918, Lieutenant J.G. David Ingalls became the first ace, Navy ace in aviation history. The very first carrier was the Langley, commissioned in March of 1922. It was the only ship of its class at the time. It was 542 feet long, displaced 12,700 tons, and had 36 aircraft and a crew of 486. It was scuttled in 1942 by following a Japanese attack 75 miles south of Java. And it was a converted coal ship initially. The Lexington class, 2 ships, 888 feet, displaced 36,000 tons, 88 aircraft, and a crew of 2,790. And then the Ranger class, it was only 1 ship in that particular class, displaced 25,000 tons and had 90 aircraft on board. They were the largest aircraft carriers in the U.S. Navy until the Midway class. So that's the Lexington class were the largest at 888 feet. The Saratoga served throughout the war, and despite being torpedoed during World War II, heavily damaged by kamikazes in the Battle of Iwo Jima in early '45. The Ranger class, as I said, only 1 was built, and they spent most of World War II in the Atlantic and the Med against the German Navy, which was a weaker opponent and supported various combat operations. That was the Ranger. It was the first one to be built as a carrier from the ground up. The Yorkshire class, 3 ships, 825 feet, 25,000 tons, 80 aircraft, and a crew of 2,217. And the Yorkshire, they were a smaller displacement than the Lex, and they maintained a high operational speed and without sacrificing protection features and air capacity. Improved durability and provided close to all-weather ability to launch airplanes. The Hornet was one of that class. It launched a Doolittle raid in April of 1942. All 3 carriers fought in the Battle of Midway. The Yorktown was sunk during the Battle of Midway, as I'm sure many of you know. The Hornet was sunk during the Battle of Santa Cruz in October of '42, and the Enterprise was the most decorated World War II ship with 20 battle stars. The Wasp class, 1 built, commissioned in April of 1940, and reduced size and more vulnerability to the version of the Yorktown. The initial deployment to Atlantic and Mediterranean was transferred to the Pacific following the losses at Coral Sea and Midway battles. Now we come to the Essex class. They were really the most built ship of any carrier. There were 24 ships built during World War II that were part of the Essex class. They were all commissioned between '42 and '46. There were 2 versions. There was the normal version, which was 872 feet long. And then there was what they called the extended version, which was 888 feet. And the displacement was essentially the same. The crew was quite a bit larger on the Essex class extended. They had 3,400 and 48 versus 2,600 in the Essex class, the basic Essex class. So then the Independence class joined 9 carriers built in this group. They were all commissioned in 1943, and they converted from the Cleveland class light carriers. A vital component of the first of the Fast Carrier Task Force, the Princeton was sunk during the Battle of Leyte Gulf, and in October of '44, it was the last U.S. carrier sunk during World War II. The Bella Wood, CV-24, and the Langley were transferred to the French Navy in 1951, and the Cabot was transferred to the Spanish Navy in '67. Gerald Ford served on the USS Monterey as an assistant navigator, athletic officer, and an aircraft gunnery officer. George Bush flew the Avenger from the San Jacinto, and all ships were initially decommissioned by the 1947. The Battle of Coral Sea, of course, was very, very famous. The first battle strictly between aircraft carriers. Opposing ships were never in sight of each other. All combat action was carried out by carrier-based aircraft, and the Lexington was sunk during that battle. Tactical victory for Japan, lost fewer ships in tonnage, but a strategic victory for the U.S. because we stopped them from advancing on New Guinea at the time. Carriers really did turn the battle in the Pacific. As we all know, the Battle of Midway was very famous, and it was a turning point in World War II as far as the Pacific theater is concerned. We sunk 4 carriers in a matter of minutes in that battle, and that was really the turning point for the Pacific theater. And if you've been to the Midway and you've seen the movie, that's a very good representation of what happened in that battle. Then there were what they call the workhorses, the escort carriers. There was a number of small carriers built during World War II that just carried a lot of troops and were escorting. They were looking for subs and escorting the main carrier task force. George Bush, of course, as we all know, was the youngest naval aviator in World War II. At 18 years old, he was assigned to a torpedo squadron, and he flew the Avenger. 58 combat missions. He was shot down on a bombing run near Chinchi Island, and he was rescued by a submarine, the USS Finback, and received the Distinguished Flying Cross, and of course had a distinguished career, ultimately becoming President of the United States, obviously. Carrier casualties of World War II. The Lexington in the Battle of Coral Sea, the Yorktown in June of '42 in the Battle of Midway, was being towed back to Hawaii and was sunk by a Japanese submarine. The Wasp, September of '42 at San Cristobal Island, and the Hornet in Santa Cruz in '42 as October 27th, Santa Cruz Island, and then the Princeton in the Battle of Leyte Gulf. Next comes the Midway class carriers. The Midway, of course, being the first of those 3. Took about 18 months to build. Built in Newport News, Virginia. It took about $89 million to build, to contrast that with the Gerald Ford, which took about $12 billion to build. It was built in 18 months, and the Ford took about 4 years to build, just to give you some sense of the contrast between the two. Originally, it was displaced 45,000 tons. It was converted twice, as you probably know. It started out as a straight deck carrier. It was the first steel deck carrier of its kind. And they converted it in '55. They converted and put the 11-degree angle deck. And then in '66, they put it back in the yard again and converted it to what you see today, which is a 13-degree angle deck. So it went from about 49,000 tons to about 65,000 tons, something in that range. It was one of the longest serving ships in the Navy history, 47 years. And it has many distinctions, not the least of which as the most visited maritime museum in the world. This past summer, we crossed over 20 years as a museum. We've had 20 million people come on the ship during that time. So it's set an all-time record for attendance. We've been averaging about 1 million a year. Of course, the Franklin, Roosevelt, and the Coral Sea were part of that group of carriers. Then they had the Saipan class, which was built after that. They were smaller ships in the almost 700 feet range, 14,000 tons, and they were basically converted to either a communication ship or a command and control ship. They really weren't very capable of operating as a full-time carrier, so they converted them to a different use. The future of aviation was really in jets, and that's what converted. That's why we ended up with an angled deck, because of the development of the jet engine. The jet engine, now you have airplanes that are twice as big, twice as heavy, and coming aboard about twice as fast. So the idea of the angled deck, which the British developed, and we were the first ones to actually produce one, but the British came up with the idea of the angled deck. And by having the capability of using an angle, you overcome the problem of a propeller plane. Back in the day before angled decks, there were 14 resting gear cables. When you get the angled deck, you have 3 or 4 cables that you're dealing with, because if you miss, you go back around. So it was a real evolution in the modern lexicon of carrier aviation. The Antedium CV-36 was the first of the angled decks to be converted. Then we go into the super carriers, the Forrestal class. There were 4 ships: the Enterprise, the Forrestal, the Saratoga, the Ranger, and the Independence. Very large island, over 1,000 feet long, displaced 60,000 tons, and manning level was about 5,540, something like that. So much bigger carriers, more capable, carried more fuel, carried more capability as a threat. Then up the ante, the Kitty Hawk was 63, the Connie 64, and the America 66. They made incremental improvements. They were much bigger in terms of tonnage, 75,000 tons. Big crew, 1,070 feet long or so. And then, of course, the Enterprise was in a class by itself, CVN-65, I should say. 1,100 feet long, displaced 93,000 tons. It's interesting that it had 8 reactors, and the modern carriers all have 2, like the Ford has 2. It's just amazing to me, the amount of development that's come along with the Ford and all the technology. In fact, the technology is such that the Ford is able to have about 500 less manning level because of the amount of technology that's been put into that ship, even though it took a long time to get the bugs worked out with all the elevator problems and that kind of thing. They finally got it going. They were a key component in the Cold War, certainly. They could carry lethal weapons. They could stay on station. Defensive systems were much more capable. Then in the Korean War, of course, there were 18 different carriers, supports, Essex and escort class carriers. More than 250,000 sorties were flown during that time. In the Vietnam era, 24 different carriers supported the Essex class, the Midway, the Forrestal, the Kitty Hawk, and the Enterprise class. 86 different carrier deployments, 9,200 days of combat, delivered more than 1.5 million tons of ordnance, and 532 aircraft were lost in combat. So the nuclear versus conventional, obviously, as we say about the Midway, you had to refuel often because we were burning diesel fuel marine, and whereas the nuke boats, all the nuke ones, can refuel about every 25 years or so. So there's a huge difference in the upkeep and the maintenance costs of a nuclear ship versus a conventional ship like the Midway. They carry more fuel because they don't have to have fuel for the ship itself. It's just for the aviation side of things. They can carry more weapons. They're more capable. The Nimitz class, in fact, the Nimitz is the oldest, number 68 is the oldest of the Nimitz class carriers, right? It'll probably be the next one to go. When the Ford, now that the Ford is out, I would imagine it won't be long before the Nimitz will go back to being non-used. It's 1,092 feet long and displaced 100,000 tons. It's a bigger crew too, 6,100 members. During the post-war era, the Midway, Ranger, America, and Teddy Roosevelt, of course, were all operating in Desert Storm in the Gulf. The Midway being the lead carrier because our admiral was the senior admiral over there. The Enterprise operated in Desert Shield, in the Bush, in the Iraq War, and the intervention in 2014. The U.S. was involved in 20 wars, conflicts, and military interventions during World War II. During the war, since the end of World War II. Most of the conflicts connected with the ongoing war on terror. And these are a listing here of all the different carriers involved in Desert Storm, Enduring Freedom, Southern Watch, Deliberate Force, Afghan War, Iraq War, and Operation Ocean Shield. And here's the Ford, as I said, class commissioned in 2017. First deployed in 2022, there were a lot of issues with the Ford in terms of its elevators, and it was the bomb elevators really that was the issue, as I understand it. But it displaces 100,000 tons, and it has all this technology. And the uniqueness of the Ford class is that they have electromagnetic catapults instead of steam cats, and they have a whole new arresting gear system as well. It is an amazing ship, 20% less crew, like I said. It's got a crew of 4,500, and they plan to build 10. At this time, the Kennedy is already being built, it's close to being completed. The Enterprise will be next, and then, of course, the Dory Miller will be the third of that class. Since the end of World War II, the Navy has engaged in 200 global humanitarian disaster relief and medical assistance rescues at sea. So here's a listing: the Saipan, the Hurricane Hazel in Haiti, the Champlain in Spain, the Kearsarge, the Typhoon Vera in Japan, the Riscony, the rescue of UK sailors in '67, the Midway, of course, Operation Frequent Wind. In fact, about a month ago, we had a celebration of the 50th anniversary of Frequent Wind, where the Midway evacuated over 3,000 Vietnamese men, women, and children without incident, and they were one of a number of ships, the Hancock, and a number of other maritime ships. There were 6 or 7 in the group. They evacuated over 7,000 Vietnamese during that period of time. And the amazing story is that during the evacuation, right in the middle of it, as a small airplane came over and dropped a note on the deck. And the note blew away, and it came by the second time, dropped the note again. Third time, took his weapon out and wrapped the note around the weapon and dropped it on the deck. One of the sailors went out and grabbed the note, took it up to the captain, and the note said, "Clear the deck. I have my wife and 5 children in this airplane." And so the captain, Captain Larry Chambers, now a retired Admiral Larry Chambers, had a choice to make. He had 2 admirals he reported to. And one of them said, "Don't think about what you're doing. Think about what you're thinking about doing." And the other one said, "Do what you have to do." So he did what he had to do. So everybody that wasn't on watch, he called them up on the deck, and they started pushing these South Vietnamese helicopters over the side to make way for this gentleman to land. He landed safely with this little airplane. In fact, the replica of it's on the Midway. The actual original aircraft is in the Pensacola Aerospace Museum. But the replica hangs in the Midway in the hangar deck there. And he was just back. Major Bong, who was the gentleman flying the airplane, he actually stole the airplane. He was so desperate to get his family out. And so Larry Chambers was also at this event. It was quite an amazing day to listen to those guys recount. And Larry Chambers is well into his 90s at this point. He's still very, very sharp. The Langley, these are the all-star carriers. The Langley, of course, being the first, commissioned in '22 and catapulted off the first plane in November of that year. It was the testbed for carrier flight and tactical operations, and it was converted to a seaplane tender in 36 and scuttled in 42. The Boxer was the first carrier to launch all jet aircraft in 48. A battle star Korea, 8 battle stars in Korea and 2 battle stars from Vietnam. It supported the Cuban Missile Crisis, disaster relief from the hurricane in Haiti, and the NASA recovery, Apollo recovery in 66, and converted to a helicopter landing ship, LPH-4, in 59. The Boxer, first carrier to launch all jet aircraft in 48, and the Ranger. 13 battle stars launched the U-2 flight in 64. First all-weather flight crew landed the E-1, or C-1 trader rather, in 83. The movie Top Gun was filmed in 85, and Star Trek was also filmed in 86. Launched the B-25 Mitchell bomber to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Doolittle flight to Tokyo in 1992. Operation Desert Storm in 91. The Enterprise, of course, was the first nuclear-powered carrier, engaged in major military action, except the Battle of the Coral Sea, embarked, this is the original Enterprise, I'm sorry, and shot down 911 planes, sunk 71 ships, and damaged 192. And of course, the Midway, as I've indicated earlier, it's just celebrated our 20th anniversary as a museum, and the new CEO, Admiral Terry Kraft, has made it his stated goal to have new exhibits. So last a year ago in May, we opened a new firefighting and engineering exhibit, and then the 27th of this month, we're opening a CVIC intelligence exhibit that will be very interactive, based on Desert Storm. And you go in and they'll pose a problem, and you have to try and solve the problem as a guest coming on board the ship. So it should be pretty cool. So other museums, the Yorktown is in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. The Hornet is, of course, in Alameda, California. The Intrepid in New York, of course. And the Lexington is in Corpus Christi, Texas. So as I said, we opened in 2004. We have over 30 restored aircraft on board. And we have the Battle of Midway Theater, multi-layer education program. We provide education, STEM training for about 40 or 50,000 kids locally, and now they've gone during COVID, they started doing Zoom presentations around the country, and now we're in 50 states. So we're doing the STEM training for education throughout the United States. All 50 states are participating in STEM training with the Midway. So the way I look at it, it's a great way to get our future guests come on board, is to learn about the ship, learn about leadership, learn about training, learn about STEM issues, and then to come out from wherever state you might be. And if you're coming to California, you've got to come see the Midway. I think it's a great marketing idea. So this is a centennial. Afforded the nation the opportunity to honor the legacy of the Navy aircraft carrier and the sailors who served aboard, and to reaffirm their contribution to the country's safety, security, and prosperity. Right, Vice Admiral Scott Kahn. So that's the presentation. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to try and answer any questions you might have. Thank you very much.
I do have one question.
Yes, sir.
I've read a couple of different definitions for the V in CV. I know C is carrier. What do you say the V is?
I think it's a French word, and I don't know exactly the French word, but it has to do with flight, and it's a word that's it's in the French language, and that's my understanding of what it is. Anybody else? I'm happy to take all all better ideas.
During the Battle of the Philippine Sea, when they had the carrier, the San Luis, the escort carrier. And wasn't that the first aircraft carrier sunk by kamikazes or something?
I think it might have been, yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
What was the carrier that had the accident with the John, where the missile fired on the carrier?
Yeah, I think it was the Oriskany, I believe. I think it was the Oriskany.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was the Oriskany. Where one of the
John McCain was on.
John McCain
He was in the airplane.
he was in the airplane on the flight deck, and I think it was a Zuni rocket somehow got launched and hit his airplane, and he luckily got out safely. But yeah, I'm pretty sure it was the Oriskany, and that was the origin of the Oriskany fire.
We think it's the Forrestal.
It's Forrestal.
Was it the Forrestal?
Is that the
Okay.
question?
The Oriskany had a fire too.
Yeah, it also had a bad fire. The Oriskany did, yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
one of the ready rooms,
Right.
the air crews suffered a lot of casualties.
yeah, exactly.
Forrestal is when the Zuni rocket.
That was the Zuni. Okay, I stand corrected.
And the
Forrestal then, right.
major conflagration on the flight deck.
Right,
And John McCain was in one of the A4s.
right, exactly.
He got out
Yep.
successfully.
Fortunately, got out, exactly.
Forest Fire.
Yeah.
USS Forest Fire.
Yeah.
But didn't the Kitty Hawk also have a fire when they had I think it was an F-4 that launched and their drop tanks broke open?
It's not the drop tanks, it's the centerline slap fire.
Is that what it was?
Yeah, the F-4 was susceptible to a centerline slap fire, and it would appear that the airplane was totally burning up, from those observing after the launch. Are you talking about the one where they had 2 ejections?
No, this was, from what I remember, the JP-4 went all over the flight deck and burned and killed the car. But it was from the drop tank, I thought, because
Yeah, well, the centerline slap fire would rupture the drop tank. Okay, and there was a situation, you probably remember this, Howie, where they launched an F-4, and he had a centerline slap fire, so remember, all the fuel is just
Yeah.
the centerline tank
Yeah.
is bleeding up into the burners, so the airplane just looks like it's just, exploding. And somebody yelled, F-4 off the bow, you're on fire, eject, eject. So they punched out when the procedure was to simply drop the drop tank, because then the fire was completely out. The problem was they had launched another Phantom off the bow also, and they punched out.
Oh,
Whoa.
And I'm trying to think of who it was, because I knew him. He said the skipper never looked at me the same way after that.
I can't imagine.
So I was the event manager on the Doolittle raid in '92, where we
Really?
the airplanes off Ranger.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I was on Air Force's staff then.
That's great.
That was a heck of a project.
Had to be, yeah, exactly. Well,
Aren't we currently dropping airplanes off the carriers?
yeah,
Don't they just roll off?
occasionally they do, unfortunately, right? That was not one of our finest moments, I would say. Yeah.
So, okay, so what was and I probably haven't ever dived into this. So I was my first fleet carrier was Coral Sea.
Right,
Okay, so Coral Sea, same hull,
Yep,
Midway,
yep.
same hull.
yep,
Okay, what was the intent, okay, of the super, super large flight deck, bow cats only, no waist cat, then Coral Sea comes in with a very proportional sized flight deck, 2 bow cats, 1 waist cat. What was the intent? Because Midway had 3 wires, like I said, no waist cat, so
Yeah,
it was
right.
a slower launch
yeah.
cycle.
That's a great question. I honestly don't know.
Because, they built the bulges.
Right,
Okay,
exactly.
To hold down the rocking, because
Yeah.
the flight deck
Was so heavy because of
was
it,
so
yeah,
heavy, it
yeah.
went over the edge.
Yeah, exactly.
So far.
Would dip in fact, the elevators would go underwater sometimes in heavy seas, yeah, yeah. It's a great question. I don't know the
I
answer to
just
that.
probably didn't know why they took these 2 hulls and
Yeah.
did them differently.
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know. Yes, sir.
Can you talk about the different catapult technologies they use over time?
Well, they started out with hydraulic cats, and then they went to steam, and steam has been something that's been used on virtually every carrier up until the Ford. And The steam cats were very efficient. They worked well. There was not a lot of issues with them. But they figured by coming up with this new technology on the Ford, electromagnetic cats, number one, it puts less stress on the airplane. And when airplanes cost $100 million a piece, you want to make sure that they last as long as they can. So that's the whole idea behind electromagnetic. And it has the ability to accelerate, straight out without having a big surge. It can just take off and push the airplane, or in the case of a drone, you could take a small drone that weighs virtually nothing compared to like an A5 or an A6 or an F-14 or an F-18, which is obviously a big, heavy airplane. It can handle that weight differential with no issues whatsoever. And so it's a much more efficient system, and that's my understanding is exactly why they went to it.
Well, the hydraulic cat was either on or off.
Right, yeah, exactly.
So it was just ripping the airplane apart.
Right,
Okay,
yep.
primarily.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
when they went to the steam cat, it's still a progressive catapult.
It is, it is.
Okay, but what the new cat does is eliminates the fresh water requirement.
That's exactly right, yep.
You had to turn seawater into fresh water for the steam for the catapult. And Howie and I will tell you that there were some cold showers we took. And some no showers.
Or no showers.
Because the ship would go
I
on
remember
water
that,
hours,
yeah, exactly.
Because they
Unannounced water
needed
hours,
water
yeah.
for the cats instead of for
Right,
our cats.
right.
Saltwater bug juice.
Huh?
Saltwater bug juice.
Yeah, that too, yeah.
Because it wasn't uncommon, like, no water.
Yeah, exactly.
Catapults need the.
Or you just get showered down, or you just get lathered up, and there's no water. The water goes off. It was called unannounced water hours. I remember that
Well,
well.
so the the electromagnetic cat, really, it's the saving of the water.
Yeah.
They're still both progressive. Steam
Right,
and
right.
electromagnetic are still a progressive catapult shot.
Right.
But the hydraulic, it just never worked really from the beginning.
Yeah, it was too much of a thrust. Yeah, yeah.
Is like a linear motor, is that what it is?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Exactly.
Couldn't you launch more with an electric? Didn't you have a higher frequency of launch with
Well,
electric versus steam?
You can launch a little faster.
Faster, yeah.
Okay,
Right.
You know, but you can only launch so fast anyway, because by the time they taxi the next airplane up on the CAD and
It takes
all
time,
that kind
yep,
of stuff, it's,
exactly.
you know, it's really driven by
Exactly.
how we can load the catapult more than anything.
Yes, ma'am.
The V in the aircraft carrier comes from the French verb voler, to fly.
There you go. There you go. Thank you. I knew it was a French word. I couldn't remember what the word was. Yeah, that makes
Yeah,
sense.
and I read where it was fixed wing
Yeah,
as opposed to flutter.
heavier than air. Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Well done.
Thank you.